Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife. Today, we're talking about top things employers need to know about immigration laws when hiring or retaining immigrants and international students. My name is Ian McLean. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today with a safe and welcoming space for all. We know there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible, like all chamber events, without the continued support of our partners and sponsors. So a special thank you today to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and March sponsor, RBC. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a representative of our team will get back to you right away. If you have a question for today's speaker, I'll gather those throughout the session and do our best to get that question asked our sponsor, if not, or our speaker. If not, we'll do that following the presentation. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I would now like to invite Narima Whitman, Commercial Account Manager with RBC Waterloo Region, to introduce today's guest. Narima.
Thank you, Ian. RBC Royal Bank is proud to be this month's presenting sponsor of the Business Success Series. And today I have the privilege of introducing today's guest, Jennifer Rogman. So Jennifer is an immigration lawyer in Kitchener since the year 2000. She came to Canada when she was in grade 11. She graduated from the University of Guelph with a psychology and business administration degree, and further graduated from the University of Victoria, BC for law. She started her general law practice as a business lawyer in Kitchener in the year 2000, but since 2013, she has practiced exclusively in the area of Canadian immigration law and is involved with various community groups, including Waterloo Region Immigration Partnership, for more than a decade. So thank you all today for joining us, and I'll pass it back to you, Ian.
Well, thank you, Narima, and I'm looking forward to this session. As Jennifer, welcome, and thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule. I guess one of the things that strikes me is you and I have known each other probably dating back that full 10 years. You're one of the first people I met when I took over the chamber. Actually, it's more like 11 years now. Just seems like forever. But we got to know each other through Ryan, and then when the Immigration Partnership was founded. And one of the things we've worked on is how to get businesses more connected to immigrants. And we were talking just before we went on air that you were talking dating back almost to 2003. Certainly since I've been to the chamber, we've been all saying, boy, within the next 4 or 5 years, all net new employment is going to come from immigrants and newcomers to Canada. We're already there, and we were there quite some time ago. And now we have the post-COVID labor shortages. Immigration has been non-existent during COVID, basically zero. So we've got a big backlog. So immigration is going to be more and more essential to how we solve our labor issues, but also how we make it easier for business to navigate. So I just wanted to put that context because we've known each other a long time. So some of these things you and I may have talked about, but we want to try and make it accessible to to that business owner that's watching, or the organization that wants to support businesses in bringing immigrants here or keeping them here. So maybe let's start with if I as the employer need to hire a foreign worker, where do I start? What's the to-do list to kind of start down the journey? Because I think one thing maybe further, and you can comment on this and then we'll get to the how to get started, is while we are going to try and make this as painless as possible, because if you're going to hire someone, there's not shortcuts, but ways to make it easier, but it's not painless. Your description is you're not going to get it overnight, but how you make it as short and as painless as possible is pretty important.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I am honored to be here. And it's interesting that a lot of people think during the COVID immigration did not happen, or there's a huge pause. And so did I. And when 2020 March hit, I said, I'm going to get some vacation time. So, I don't have to work so hard. I've never been so busy in 2020, 2021, which was very interesting. 2020, certainly that we went down in terms of the immigration intake, just because there is growth that immigration in Canada has to go through in terms of changing everything onto the online. I'm sure that's what a lot of business experience, how to pivot onto the online world, that where we don't have to have that, how do you have the social distance and protect everybody and do the business at the same time? And immigration was the same thing. And the interesting part is that 2021, that is accelerated and it somewhat helped them their efficiency. So what happened was actually 2021, Immigration Canada actually brought the record number of immigrants into Canada, over 400,000 people. And then they also notified that they have, we now experience almost 100% of our labor growth from immigration. Over 80% of our population growth is from immigration. And another really interesting part for our region, where we host a number of post-secondary education, is between January and November 2021, they have issued more than 127,000 postgraduate work permit. So these are students who already gone through minimum 1 or 2 years of a post-secondary education in Canada, and have received open work permit where they can work for anyone at any wage, at any capacity. Well, as long as it's illegal, of course. They can work as short as 8 months, as long as 3 years. So this is a huge, if we look at it, almost 130,000 people are available for Canadian employers, business people. And we have 3 post-secondary education the institution in our region, right out of the backyard. So this is amazing, the workforce growth that we can actually tap into immediately. So I think that's important. That also notice that I think 10 years ago, Ian, when you and I talked, at that time when we ask category population, so how do you identify yourself? 1/3 of a population identify themselves as an immigrant. So that's 10 years ago. So I'm sure now we're probably pushing 40 to 45%. So whether you like it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, or you are aware of not, a lot of your workforce is already have a newly immigrant, or I think you have a recent immigrants in your workforce, and you may have the foreign worker format of the postgraduate work permit holders in your workforce.
Yeah, you can see it. I mean, I'm volunteering at my daughter's elementary school when they were younger, being in their high schools, coaching basketball. You see it in every face. It is not the way it used to be in this community. I think it's much more multicultural and cross ethno boundaries than anyone thinks. And you're absolutely right that's one of the things we need to understand is there really is no choice. Immigration provides an opportunity and another pool of candidates, but you really have no choice anyways, whether you're, for whatever reason you're going to look into this issue. It's a business imperative. You are going to have to make more accommodations or do things a little differently in your business, because your workforce is going to look different. More women, more ethnicities and gender, all of those things are going to mean there will be some, and I don't think they're huge changes, but they are modifications, what you've seen. Listen, let's go to that first question. I'm a business. I've got, and take your pick on what the job is. It could be an engineer. It could
doesn't
be a
matter.
doctor.
Yeah.
Everyone, there's all of these needs. I need a foreign worker. How do I get started? What's the first step?
You know what? Interesting part is that nobody actually set out to hire a foreign worker initially. Many of my clients that they don't say, today I'm going to go and hire a foreign worker. They don't do that. What usually happen is that within their organization, they fall in love with these employees who work so hard. And the one day they come and said, I need to go home because I don't have work permit anymore. That's when alarm bells goes off and employers are like, no, I trained you for last 2 years. What's happening? That's usually when I get a call. What I'm talking about today is that's one way to do, but that's a sort of inadvertently you kind of fallen into that sector. What I'm saying is that I think you should, you as a Canadian employer now should have a strategy how to do this in the first place so that you can deal with it right away. And also when you encounter good candidates on your recruitment, you can actually deal with it rather than, oh, you don't have a work permit. Oh, you don't have permanent resident. Oh, I'm going to just delete you, even though you're a really good candidate. You should be able to have a capacity and capability to recognize and how to retain that talent into your organization. So if you've never done this before, okay, that's okay, by the way. The first place that you start really is the Service Canada website. So Service Canada website does have the big sector is how to hire a foreign worker. Now, this is kind of scary part. It is a huge website and it has 1,000 documents, etc. In fact, sometimes I get lost. So if you feel lost, you're on the same page. It's okay. Okay. So
count me as astounded that a government website is not easy to navigate.
I think it's a lot of times Government of Canada does provide a lot of information. But what people forget is it's up to each person who's accessing this information to discern what's applicable to them and select those information for their situations. So a lot of times I spoke with a lot of government agencies and officers for obvious reason in my course of the work, and they usually say, we provided legal information. And it's up to the user to decide whether that information is applicable. And that's where my role comes in as a lawyer, to talk about these are information, these are the situation, does it applicable? How do we strategize that customized to your workplace so it makes sense? So recently, I think the last at least a year or so, I'm getting a lot of employers who call and say, Jennifer, I don't know anything about this. Can I have this in an hour? Just train me, explain to me. I even have some clients that bring their entire HR department onto the Zoom, because now we can do everything on Zoom or some kind of a platform online. I just do one-on-one. This is how that work. Then some of the people says, you know what? We can handle it from here. Thank you very much. And they'll carry on. And we actually strategize their HR strategies on how to fit into the foreign workers into their HR their policies. Or some people basically say, Jennifer, I'm a one-man show. I do everything from beginning to the end. I just don't have a capacity to do this. Can you do this? Sure. So it's really depending on each employer, what they are willing, able, and ready to take on.
So unless you've tried to navigate the immigration system, meaning you're trying to sponsor a family member to come in, or you're trying to come into Canada, immigration law is a very complex expert specialty, and you do it as a single or in your own shop. But many firms would do this, and there are times when you can, and some with capacity and have some legal expertise, you can do it as you say in-house. In some cases, I'd say it's pretty complex. So, but getting the right advice. I think the important part of that is understand how the immigration laws apply to you. However, you have to come to that conclusion. One thing. So let's move on a little bit and say, you know, how do I know if I should hire a foreign worker? But I think it really starts with I have labor needs. It may or may not involve hiring a foreign worker. Now, foreign worker, by the way, could be, I assume, could be a student who's already studying here, because you can work as a student
Correct.
And I think this is where it gets to you, is you don't have to start saying, oh, I'm going to go and find the person in Pakistan or, Belgium or wherever to come here. There's lots of people here that you could
Already.
hire.
Mhm.
And then you've got that window of time saying, I really like Jennifer. She's really good at her job. Would you like to stay? And then you have that window of time. So those are a couple of the options, like,
Correct.
doing a search for who you're looking for, or I found someone here.
Mm.
I guess it makes a little bit of a difference of what stage you are in the immigration process.
Excellent. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then so as an international students, as long as they are full-time student registered in the educational institution, then they can work 20 hours per week. And then they can work full-time during summer semester, which is usually May, August, the term. Then once they completed their school, this is where the tricky part. Once they complete their school, they have to apply for postgraduate work permit. And then they can work full-time for wherever they continue work. But between the time they finish study, and file postgraduate work permit, they cannot work. So this is where a lot of people get screwed over, because they just continue and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, you had a 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks unauthorized work. So I usually say, okay, make sure you finish your school, take your vacation or unpaid leave, whatever you want to put it in, then start working again as a full-time worker as a postgraduate work permit after your filing. You don't have to get it as long as you have a file application filed and get a confirmation of a filing, you're good to go. So that's the only tricky part about a student. And another thing is that once a lot of times employer, I'm an employer as well as a small business, right? So I tend to find that I look at the interview and the resume, etc. They look like, I cannot believe how good you are. But I like to have like a test run. Is that, are you actually as good as you said you are? And I'm sure this is something everybody agree. So this is great that they do the probation with you 2, 3, 5 months or whatever the time you look at, and then decide this is a person that I want to invest and grow your company. Then that's a time that you actually think about how does that look like? How do I keep this person in a long term? So retention is a focused strategy at that time. Then a lot of clients are like, but Jennifer, how do I know this person? Sometimes they don't tell me they have a work permit. They don't tell me they are an international student, but they have to give you their social insurance number. If their social insurance number started with this 9, they are foreign worker or international students. Yeah. So that gives you a hint that without asking anybody whether they are foreign worker or international students. Then once that then you kind of look at them and make sure, is this the person that we would like to grow with? And is this person the investment over time? And the really key point for the international students, the first 2 years is really key element as to where they can convert and then become a sponsor by employer. And after that, they can actually stay up to 3 years with you while it's a process. So technically, if you have an international student who finished the school and postgraduate work permit, and have become a part of your organization, and you want to keep that person, potentially up to 5 years, you can keep this person. And that's significant considering that these days young people don't stay in one organization longer than.
But that also gives time.
Am I fair to say 6 months? I don't know these days.
Well,
so fast.
We know that there's a lot more turnover in the workforce. But it also gives the employer the opportunity to know whether they want to keep them, the employee to know whether the job is right for them, and that window of time, which allows for the employer and the employee to work together to make it permanent, to become either, I guess it'd be landed immigrant or
exactly. Yeah.
Listen, okay, so one thing, and this feeds into this, because I think part of this is, remember, our audience is a small business, and
yes,
I don't want to be, I think what the question I have here is, say I want to hire a foreign worker, but where do I even go to recruit them, right? Because in some ways you kind of say, well, is it a different pool of talent? And we've been struggling this at the Immigration Partnership to say, where do immigrants go so that employers, that we have a pool of candidates, employers know that it's easier for them to get, to find those, because they may not be in all of the traditional talent funnels. But you know what, there are, and I don't, it's either politically correct or it's being inclusive, and it depends on where you are in the political spectrum.
Yeah.
But you have to be conscious about the questions you ask in advertising, because
Yes.
asking for ethnicity, gender, you know, nationality, you can't do that. But how do you then try to target those that are not Canadian, right? That are not already here, or
How about we go very simple? Newcomer welcome.
yeah. Well, that's actually, I mean, that's a sort of advice that a
Yeah.
small business
Or,
needs.
or even the better one, no Canadian work experience required.
Right.
That would be the, like, you know, you bold it, highlight it, and that you will get so many candidates, you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Actually, that's I'm going to take that back to the immigration partnership, because the working group, because that is actually one thing that may really help get more candidates is
Because it has nothing to do with nationality, race, and gender, ethnicity, nothing to do with it, anything. It's very specific about the working condition, working requirement you're looking for. So
Yep.
if you basically say no Canadian work experience required, but you can still put, but I still need you to have work experience in 1 year welding, 1 year administrative work, whatever that is. It is as objective as it can be. But now they don't have to worry about whether they worked in Canada or not previously.
no, to give credit where credit's due, I think the Ontario government is trying to give foreign professionals or foreign accreditation,
Yes.
whether it's in trades or in other things, are trying to have some transferable credit for, you know, so if you do law in Ontario or you do law in New York State, yes, there's some differences, but you're still a lawyer, and
Yep.
but they make it extremely difficult in many circumstances to get.
So that I think this is something that we talked about, again, you and I talked about in the past. It's a foreign credential, how it can be recognized in Ontario is always a challenge. So professional work is actually much easier. Now the Immigration Canada have designated 5 educational credential agency, which is independent from Immigration Canada. You can actually assess all your education credential in advance. Then piece of paper basically saying that, yes, your bachelor degree in India is the same as a bachelor degree in Canada. Boom, we're done. Nobody has to say anything about it. In terms of language proficiency, there's a language proficiency test that you can take. This is a status. Boom, we don't have to worry about whether you speak English or not, whether you speak French or not. So those are a lot, figured it out. Trade is still a challenge. And it's a still challenge in a sense that some are mandatory license, for example, automotive, and I respect that. I like to have a safe car, so I think there's a fair comment on that. But welding, for example, I'm doing the welding company today, so it's in my mind. So they may require certain credential to train next generation, but just working as a welder itself in Ontario, you do not need the trade certificate. So each province also have a different rule to that, right? And it's some are voluntary, those are mandatory, and so on and so forth, any changes. So that's another thing that you have to really keep in mind.
But drawing it back to that hiring piece, right? Say newcomers welcome, foreign or Canadian experience not required. Is there a way to kind of say, you know, non-Canadian education will be considered or something? Because sometimes the reason
you can say that you're, well, one, depending on the job, you do need an educational credential, but you can say that the non-Canadian education can be recognized, or you can say if you have a non-Canadian education, please have your education credentials, the certification, then boom, we're done.
Because there could be some jobs where you say, I'd really like an engineer, but I don't need an engineer because they don't have to do stamps, right? They may be doing other work.
That's right.
Prefer an engineer, but I can. And then someone comes in and says, well, I got my engineering degree at the University of Kiev in Ukraine, and they may or may not recognize it right away. they have the skills, and then you can work on that if necessary. But all of those three things are.
I mean, if that's the case, right? If in your case of, well, this person did the engineering in Kiev, but this job, just somebody stamping on the package, for example, then when you post a job for that, require no education or high school.
Yeah.
Then we don't have to worry about whether he has a bachelor degree or master degree, whatever, right? So then we can really focus on their skill set, not necessarily on the education sector.
Okay. So sticking with this theme, I mean, because we're asking for we have the job that's available. We frankly don't care where the person comes from. We just want to have an expansive tent and not screen out unnecessarily either newcomers, immigrants, or people that are looking to come to Canada would come here to work. So those are the three pools. Does it make a difference which country the foreign workers are coming from? Like, are there some countries that are easier to deal with between Immigration Canada and their country? Or is it really individual? Like, it depends on the individual, it depends on the job, depends on a number of other factors.
Yes and no, very typical lawyer answer here. So if they're already in Canada or they already entered into Canada, it doesn't matter that much. We can work through it. But if they're outside of Canada, it does make difference. So if they require an entry visa to Canada, it can be a very challenging process. So for example, right now, the foreign worker you're inviting from India, posting time for processing for work permit is 54 weeks, which is a whole year after you've gone through everything else. So it can be a very challenging. By the way, that's not real. There was some mathematic, the formulation is less than that, but because they calculate into living caregiver application, which takes 18 months into it. So we actually called immigration. Like, are you sure? And they said, sorry, it's a mathematic average thing. But let's say if this person is from Mexico, Mexican citizens do not require entry permits. So if they have a labor market impact assessment done by you as a Canadian employer, they can grab their stuff and come to Canada and at Pearson Airport and they can get the work permit. So now we don't have a travel requirement as of April 1st, assuming they have all the vaccine done, etc. That's so you're just saving 3, 4, 5 months potentially on the work permit process. If they are already inside of Canada, we can deal with it inside. Because of a recent Ukrainian crisis right now, Immigration Canada has extended those are people who are in Canada already as a visitor, but have a labor market impact assessment already by your Canadian employer. You can apply for a work permit inside of Canada without departing. So that's until February 2023. So that's another accommodation we have to process everything in Canada.
Okay, I don't want to scare people off, so we're not going to talk about the labor market needs investment yet. That's an important one. But I want to say, okay, there's a couple of circumstances or a couple of aspects of this. If I have a newcomer or a foreign worker, I want to support them to become a permanent resident. There's a couple of, and I guess the question is how to help them, but in two fronts. One is you hire someone and say, boy, it'd be really, I think it would be helpful, or make the offer to say, would you like to improve your English language skills? Because that's going to make it, probably easier to progress. Or when newcomers come here, healthcare becomes a real issue if you're new to the country, because you may or may not be covered by OHIP right away. Or so there are some specific things to help the individual, which can also help them in terms of their productivity. But in also that as an employer, and we talked about this a little bit, saying, how do I support them to become a permanent resident? Because I want them to stay. I don't want them to go home in 3 years. What are some of those things that you can help? I mean, I know the Immigration Partnership is a resource along with the service providers to help on English as a second language and some of those other pieces. But if you look at that context, I want to keep them as a permanent residence. How do I support the whole worker, if you will? Sure.
Let me just touch on those issues that you just went through in terms of healthcare, for example. Okay, if you're students, you're international students, you have healthcare provided by university or colleges. So that's the number one area. Number two is if you have a work permit longer than 6 months and have employment, so you have a pay stub of 3 times, then you can actually get an OHIP. So
Okay.
that can be worked out. So that's, I just want to make sure those people who does not have it, please go get it, So
Yeah.
that's good. And the second thing is in terms of your actual question with respect to permanent resident transition. I usually say there's many ways to go to Toronto. Okay, so my way is usually 407 because I don't want to stuck in the 401 for 2 hours.
Yeah,
But some
I'm with
people
you.
do. I respect that. Okay, so it's the same thing with how to become a permanent resident. First is that from an employer perspective, I'm going to talk about that. That's what we are focusing on right now. You really need to figure it out how much you want to be involved. So what I meant by that, as a least, is that you can give them a reference letter or confirmation of a permanent confirmation of employment. So saying that this guy's been working for me for welder for the last 6 months or 1 year. These are the things that he has done. So he's a great worker. I want to keep him. So that's what they're going to need in terms of doing their Canadian Experience Class Permanent Resident application to show that I have worked 1 year in Canada on a particular job. So that's the least that the employer could do to support. Second thing is that they can do the labor market impact assessment for the worker for the purpose of a permanent resident. Then that will add additional 50 points onto their assessment score. Or so somebody is, so let me just pick the one client that I have that this guy does not speak English that well. He just finished high school, no post-secondary education, but he works so hard. He's a perfect for this particular job he's doing that no Canadian is really interested in doing. By the way, he does the food processing job. So you can imagine that how important it is for us to have that food security, but at the same time, very few people wants to do. Now, in that case, employer can hire this worker and telling Government of Canada and Government of Ontario, I would like to sponsor this person as employer. So now they're not looking at so much as the employees, the credential. They were looking at, there is a Canadian employer quarterbacking this guy, and now the process become a lot smoother. And what is the benefit for employer is, number one, employee will be eternally grateful. We're not talking about just employee, where a lot of times there's a spouse and the children involved. So you're basically settling entire family and potentially entire village, okay? Number two, that usually after the whatever work permit they have, they actually need to get a very specific employer-specific work permit, which is you who's helping for 2-3 years. This guy cannot work anybody else but you. So you have an employee who's committed to your company for a very specific period of time, and they will work really, really hard in most of times. So
I just want to drill on that because I think that's an important factor, right? Going through a lot of this, if you bring someone in and they say 3 months later, yeah, sucks to be you, I'm going to go down the street because someone's going to pay me 4 cents more an hour or another $1,000 bucks.
Exactly.
I put time and effort into this. Is that more standard than not? That would be when you're going along that pipeline, that there's a period of time where the employer that's putting in the time and effort has got, the fair market, et cetera, but the only Canadian employer they can work for is you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, if you think about it, that in order to go through and get that specific work permit, your name as you as a Canadian employee's name is on that work permit, so that person cannot work anywhere else. You need to pay median wage on the job bank for that particular employment. In many a case, it is a higher than market rate. So a lot of times they wouldn't go anywhere because you are paying a fair and good wage and support you for a permanent resident, and the working condition is a fair and square. They wouldn't go, really. And a lot of times, but that's the downside, that 3-4 years later, that they get the permanent resident, everybody's settled, yay, you are now a permanent resident, that employee has a right to depart. But then, if you think about it, anyone, whether you're Canadian or not, have a right to quit. That's why we live in democracy, right? So I usually tell employers about, you have that risk with the Canadian too.
Yeah, and it also, you also have the window of 2 or 3 years of making it such a great work experience.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, you're taking care of them and they feel valued, that they won't want to go somewhere else. And the added benefit, you're living in Kitchener-Waterloo or the region of Waterloo, which is the best place in the world to live. So you've got that going for
I
you too.
agree. And then, you know what I have to say? This is a great community. I have so many clients and so many employer who got to know their employee and said, I have one employer, but Jennifer, I will do anything for this employee. But as a lawyer, it's like, I need to get instruction. Are you okay if I do this? If I do this, is it going to help him? I said, yes. Well, I told you anything. Well, I still have to get an instruction, right? But I have so many of those employers who basically say, I like this guy, or he's a great worker. I know his wife, he has 2 children, whatever the story is. They have become such a big family in that workplace. And I think that's a sort of a joy of working for a small business too, for me, is it's not like a 200, 300, 500 like a people company, which is nothing wrong with those companies, by the way. But I find that clients who have businesses under, I would say under 30, really have created that family-like environment. And basically, like, he has become our family, Jennifer. We really want to keep them, and I love their children, and they step up big time.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, so a little bit back to the practical part.
Yep.
I've got a job vacancy. Where do I go to find permanent residents that may be here looking for work, or newcomers that are either coming or in progress for my company? Like, where would be, is there a kind of, here are the 3 or 4 spots, or here are the 3 or 4 things you do that can kind of get your arms around the talent that's available as far as newcomers are concerned?
Well, I think it's a first that you need to have a dual purpose strategy on this, on job posting or the recruitment itself, meaning that your first purpose is look for people, like may that be a Canadian or non-Canadian. And the second purpose is that if this is like, we cannot find a Canadian, that you can proceed to hire foreign worker without going back to the like ground zero. So my recommendation is always start with the job bank, which is a mandatory recruitment tool you must have in order to apply for labor market impact assessment. So that's the minimum you must do. It is not an easy software to work through, but unfortunately, that's the way it goes. Then usually I recommend a couple national sites. So alljobs.ca, the Canada's Job.ca, and those are all free, and knock yourself, not a problem. Then a lot of times I ask for a couple of very specific local sites you might want to consider. Like, for example, like Indeed is a local site, Kijiji is a local site. And another thing that a lot of people forget about is career services at colleges and universities. It's a great place to get the people, not only the international students, but their spouses who came to Canada, and they have open work permit as long as a study permit of their spouses. So they'll be looking for a job as well. So it's a great resource to find the newcomers for sure. Another thing is that YMCA Immigration Services in Kitchener, they have a really good record of the job site. So it's a great place. Of course, Immigration Partnership is always the quarterbacking everybody on that. So that's a good place to do.
One of the, I think that's very important. And I guess I should have known that. The job boards at the universities and colleges is probably more useful than we give it credit for. Many of the students that are coming here that would come with their family are students. They're doing their master's or their PhD or a second degree. So you're right. Their spouse will be on there who may have professional skills and be available.
Absolutely.
Listen, so let's come back to, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I didn't want to do it right away because everyone would have tuned out and said it's too damn complicated. So I'm not talk about and it's called the Labor Market Needs Assessment, and it is required by Immigration Canada. I think on both sides, whether you're immigrating, whether you're new, and this is a requirement of the employer, and it really is saying that are you bringing people in when there's people already here that can do the job?
Correct.
I think this should be getting simpler because we know that there are huge gaps in available labor, but it's not uncomplicated. That's as charitable as I'll be. It's not.
So let me put it this way. So there's this number of agencies involved. This is where people get confused, first of all, okay? So the labor market impact assessment is actually anchored by the ESDC, Employment Social Development Canada, which is also have another name for Service Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they're the one, because they're the one checking out our labor market, how strong, weak, and what we need or what we don't need, etc. They're a federal government agency. They work conjunction with Immigration Canada. With Immigration Canada is looking, okay, you pick this foreign worker to work for you. I know that we need them. That what their functionality is, can they actually do it? So they're looking at the capability of a worker you have chosen, whereas ESDC Service Canada is, do you actually need this person? So those are their different functionality. So a lot of times I remember one employer like, do you think I'm going to go through this if I don't need them? That was their question. My response is like, yes, but we have to put it on the 2D, not 3D. Meaning is you have to put it on the paper to prove it, okay? So in essence, the labor market impact assessment is really about proving 3 factors. Number 1, is this a real job? Meaning is that this is not a nepotism. You're not giving this to your wife's next door neighbor. This is a job that you need somebody to do it really. Easy to fill right now. Everybody needs other people right now. Number 2, is this a work you're gonna pay and provide it equal or better working condition than Canadian? So again, it's an easy requirement to meet from a lot of Canadian employer. Third requirement is where we get some trouble. Third one is, okay, have you really looked hard and low with respect to finding a Canadian worker who can fill it in? The end of the day, yes, we have to give a priority to Canadian worker. I don't dispute that at all, okay? The problem is that we just don't have enough Canadian worker. That's our problem right now. So when we do that, how you're gonna prove this is through your recruitment effort. So job bank is a mandatory, then the couple national and a couple local. So basically my recommendation in general is a 5, the recruitment site is what you're looking at. And then you need to track it. It's not good enough that you actually put it on. You have to look at who came, how you process each candidate so that you give the best shot. So for example, I tried to do this with the construction laborer, for example. The client got over 200 applicants and 100 of them are from outside of Canada. So we just got eliminated right off the bat because they're not Canadian. Then the other 100 out of that, only 30 people actually reply back that I'm interested. And out of 30, only 10 people actually show up for the interview. And actually 2 people show up in the interview and they hired. And after 3 days, they quit. So we document all this. This is what happened. And we didn't have any problem getting the labor market impact assessment because the record you show, the track record you show is so clear that what you have done. And this is where that I ask a Canadian employer, basically, do you have a capacity and capability to actually document this? And can you actually show this to the ESDC? And are you comfortable with it? Some people said, yeah, done this before, no problem. Hunky-dory we go. Some people like, I don't even know half the thing you're talking about. So just tell me one step at a time. Just hold me until the end of the road. And we do that. I mean, it's really depending on, you have to be honest with yourself. What do I need? So after we finish that labor market impact assessment, then you get a piece of paper and you need to bring your foreign worker within 6 months from the day you got approval. So that's where the timing kicks in. So some people have a worker instead already like ready to go. And some people don't have any. So we have what we call the unnamed candidate. So we start with, we don't know who it is. We're gonna go with the Joe Blow and we will find Joe Blow somehow, but it's gonna be unnamed as the LMIA approval.
You would do that if you say, I don't think I'm gonna find somebody, but in going through the assessment, you, to your point, you're going to go through those national sites, you're going to go through some local sites, you're going to put a job posting, and you're going to discover over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, I've got no applicants because or not qualified applicants. In the meantime, you're also going through starting the paperwork phase of saying, I know I'm going to have to do all this before I can go and get a foreign
That's
or a
right.
new
That's right.
immigrant. And so you're doing these things in parallel. Got to
That's
search
right.
for the.
You got it. You got it. You got it.
Okay.
So let's say, for sake of argument, let's say that, you know what, Jennifer, I may need somebody 3 months from now. My recommendation, do it now, because by then you will have approval in your hand. And that if somebody comes, James comes in and says that, I'm from United Kingdom and I decide to, kind of check out Canada, here I am, then you just put James's name onto your approval letter that you basically send to ESDC, hey, we finally found a worker. His name is James. They put it on and they'll give it back to you. Then that person can get the work permit literally overnight because he's from United Kingdom. This is where the country of origin is important, because he can go to United States in Niagara Falls, turn around and get a work permit. Then you have a foreign worker in your hand right off the bat. Now, if this person happened to be Philippine, then we have to do the work permit and it's going to take another 3 months to make him start working.
But that comes back to the where they're coming from does make
That's
a
right.
difference.
That's
There are
right.
some base things that you need to do, and then it depends on where they're coming from. Listen, we're actually reasonably on time. We got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to local international students.
Yeah.
Huge resource, because we know depending on what year, but there's got to be somewhere close to 50,000, 60,000 international students between Conestoga College, University of Waterloo, and Laurier. Just our 3 post-secondaries, I said.
Correct.
There's a huge pool of students. Now, they're full-time students if they're coming into the country, but they can work up to 20 hours a week.
Correct. During their school years, yes.
During their school year, you said that at the beginning. What are the benefits of hiring that? I mean, I've always said that one that I see for an employer is if they can get someone, we all need, sometimes it's helping with a gap or doing a project. But it seems to me that's just a pipeline of, wow, there's summer terms coming up. I'd like them full time for 4 months in the summer. And even more is, boy, I really like that Jennifer she's a great student, but boy, I'd like to hire her when she's finished. You almost can do that, it becomes that pipeline of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that one of the prime benefits of trying? I mean, their expertise too. A lot of them are very, very bright. They're hardworking. But are those the reasons that international students you really should be looking at those as students?
I would say like a lot of international students, their end goal is become a permanent resident in Canada. Really, end goal is. Although they may not, some students are very specifically, I would like to go back to my home country. I grant you that, it's not an issue. But most of them, even if they do so, they want to have a Canadian work experience to go onto their resume when they go back to their home in China or Pakistan, wherever they're from, is that, wow, you have a foreign work experience, is really highlight to their resume. And another thing is that as an international student, they want to experience too, just like a regular university students, they want to have a work experience. So they may work for you in a much lower wage than the others. That's another benefit you can think of because they're students. So you don't have to pay them in a regular salary, so to speak. And if there's a 20 students, one is like supply and demands, right? And a lot of them are willing to try out whatever job you have, especially your job is something they really want to do after their study. I get the tons of intern requests all the time, international or otherwise. And I'm sure some of the jobs are like that. It's a great way to have, the long-term relationship with your employee. I mean, the end of the day, it's a human resource, right? If you don't have people to work for you, you can't run the business. That's just the bottom line these days, right? So
there's lots of resources in the universities and college themselves too.
Absolutely.
there's certainly the program that we run at the Chamber, the Access Student Talent Program, which is to connect small businesses with university students.
Yep.
We certainly are seeking out anyone, whether they're foreign students or not. But the universities have their own offices dedicated to foreign students.
You see, one thing that I like about international students, they're more mature because a lot of them have already finished their bachelor degree or their first degree. This is their second degree. So I find them a little more mature. Second thing is that they really want to work.
Yeah.
And I find it these days, half of the battle is you show up.
Yeah.
Half the battle is you respond. Are you interested? Are you willing to actually do this? Is half the battle. So to me, they have that willingness that other Canadian students may not have yet.
You must deal with the same employers I do who say that it used to be, how good were your grades and and getting in and go. Now it's basically that you actually show up when you say you're going to for the interview would be, oh, wow, you actually showed up, because that's how tight the labor market is. Listen,
Ian, I have 2 children who is in post-secondary. So my argument always to them is show up is half the battle is won.
It's 88% of life. I don't know what the other 12 is, but showing up. Listen, we're down to our last 3 or 4 minutes, so we're going to try and do this a little quick. And it comes back to we talked about labor market needs assessment. We've talked about the process. Is there anything, and I guess this isn't really, if there's anything to speed up or advance the process, and maybe the question really is, describe what is the quickest it can be, because it's not, you cannot, snap your fingers and 2 weeks later have somebody. But what, you've talked about a bunch of these things. Just kind of go, get started, get on, identify what your job need is, post it, and is there a place where someone can look and say, here's the timeline I'm looking at? It really is if you found somebody, it would be 3 months. If you were looking for someone, it might be 4 months, so that they understand, because part of for businesses, they get frustrated and say, screw it, I don't have time for that. They need to kind of in their own mind kind of say, okay, I know this is going to take 3 or 4 months or 2 or 3 months. What should they expect and to make that as quick and painless as possible?
I think the best advice I can give to all Canadian employer who's thinking about this process is get the information up front and don't dabble. You don't have time to dabble these days, okay? I just find that I'm a business person too. I just want to know what is the bottom line. Give me the bottom line so I can plan it out. But if you want to kind of play around this thing, it never get it done. So it's like a building of, a deck. Your wife can nag you until kingdom comes. If you don't start, it's not going to build automatically. Okay. So at the end of the day, you basically have to say, okay, here's a time. Here's what it is. We got to get through. And then you have a plan and you can execute it, and may not be you personally. You can have somebody else to execute it. Know yourself, how much you are willing, able, ready to do. What are the things you don't want to do? And then you can make a decision on it. I am perfectly capable of doing cleanup of my own house. I just don't want to.
Yeah. So that's
the bottom line. Okay. So, the end of the day to me is once you have a clear plan. So I cannot, at the end of the day, right? After experience 2 years of COVID, we all know, we are certain, nothing is a certain.
Yeah.
Right. True. But what I can do is I can make it clear as of where you are today, what needs to happen, so that where you're going to be.
Yeah.
So that sense of a clarity so that you can make a decision, so you're no longer paralyzed. I don't know about this. It looks scary. And I usually say, hey, if you know how the beast look like, you can kill it. That's the bottom line.
And I think that's actually the answer I was looking for, which is if you don't do your planning and you don't get the help that you need, it could take forever. If you get the information up front, understand what you're trying to do, get some advice, it will be as short as it can be when you've got the right people helping you. Listen, before we
You
go,
know what? It's like a take a test. If you know exactly what test's gonna be, you can knock it down and do a good grade. If you go in and I read the entire textbook, but I have no idea what the question is, you maybe do a decent, but you may I read it everything, but it was useless. So
now you told me that. Now I would have been a much better student if you told me that 30 years ago. Listen, and Nora from the Immigration Partnership was the question that she has with the huge labor gaps we've been talking about. Is there anything changing at the government level to make it easier and more time efficient for employers? And I think we've mentioned one example of that, which has come out of the Ukraine, which is to make landed immigrant status and getting Canadians in here and being able to apply for work permits in country versus, where they're coming from, which is Poland or other NATO frontline states. But are there other things that they're trying to do to ease or make it easier on employers?
Well, it was interesting because last year that the Immigration Canada have selected a huge amount of skilled worker or even the basic skilled workers to become a permanent resident. At February 2021, they selected almost 27,000 Canadian experience class. We went down to the 0.75 from 460. So we grabbed everybody literally working in Canada at the time. We have offered 90,000 the temporary resident to permanent resident status in May to July last year. So the problem is now we have to process all this. So it's been really busy in that sense. The problem is this: we have too many in the system, in the immigration system. So I think Immigration Canada will slow down. We can see that they have not selected any regular skilled worker program since September 2021, almost 6 months that they've paused. And I expect that they're gonna do that at the draw again in the later time of 2022. But now strategy is really on the provincial government. So Ontario provincial government is really need to step up in terms of settling more the foreign workers and students in Canada.
Yeah, the provincial designate program, et cetera.
That's right. Okay. But you also have to remember, we started with a 500 spot. We are almost at the 8,000 spot in a matter of 10 years. So we are working on it. It's a work in progress, right?
You and I could talk all afternoon, but since we only have 2 more minutes left, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we're going to have to wrap up. So I'm putting you on the clock. You got 1 minute for this one. We've talked about who and how to connect with people, and I think that there's lots of resources available through contact Jennifer, the chamber, but folks like the YMCA that you talked about, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region knows all the service providers and folks that can help give both immigrants and businesses some assistance to start to ask the right questions so that you make the right choices and put the time and effort in the right way to make it as painless and quick as possible. But maybe the last question is just what are your what's the takeaway for an employer that's watching today that they should take a top 3 or 4 things that just keep in mind and say, great opportunity, great employees are available. Here are the top 3 or 4 things that you should think about coming away from today's session.
Prepare, don't get caught off guard. And to know your employees right now. Who do you have? And ask them if they know anybody who would like to work for them, who may be foreign worker or international student or family member. They will tell you list. So prepare for the what you have to do. So have an emergency plan. I have an emergency plan. What happened if I get in the car accident? So have a plan if we got nobody, how the foreign worker works. Check with your current employees who are available, within your organization. And you may be surprised how many foreign workers you may have already, how eager they are to stay with you and the transition gonna happen. And third one is, don't be scared about this process, but don't underestimate either. So know exactly where you are and how you have customized a plan for your organization for the future. So may not be now, but we talked about this a number of times the last 20 years. This will happen. It's here now. So it will happen in your organization, whether you like it or not. Let's plan it out.
Listen, that's a great place to leave it. Eyes wide open, but the opportunity is huge. I think that could be our bumper sticker today to help you with your talent challenges as a business. Listen, thank you, Jennifer. Always good to talk with you. Hopefully, we'll see you back at immigration partnership meetings in the coming days as we start to slowly open as a province. But we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, that does bring us to the end of today's session. Thanks once again to our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and March sponsor, RBC. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new business success series every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week for The Age of Fraud, how to best protect yourself and your business. Aaron and Ekaterina from Business Banking at RBC will explore the commonly seen scenarios within our own community and explore some of the ways you can better protect yourself and your business. To register and to find out more on other upcoming events, please visit us at greaterkwchamber.com. Please share this series with your friends and colleagues and join us again next Wednesday for another edition of the Business Success Series. Because if it's Wednesday, it is the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.